It was a love story that everyone admired. From the outside, Caroline and James Taylor appeared to be the epitome of perfection. A beautiful couple, both in their early 30s, living in a sprawling, immaculate house on a quiet street in the suburbs. They had it all: good looks, wealth, status, and most importantly, the kind of love that made people believe in fairy tales. But behind the closed doors of their picture-perfect home, a darkness festered, a darkness that no one could have imagined. It started like any other marriage, filled with hope, dreams, and the thrill of new beginnings. James, a successful lawyer, was dedicated to providing the best life for Caroline, his college sweetheart. She, in turn, seemed to be the perfect wife, beautiful, caring, and supportive. They would go on vacations together, throw lavish dinner parties, and share the occasional quiet night at home. It was the kind of life that made people envious. But as the years passed, something began to change. James became consumed by his career, working longer hours at the law firm, barely noticing how Caroline started to withdraw. She too was busy, but not with work. She began attending parties without him, going on weekend trips with her friends, and spending more time away from home. She started to wear new clothes, flaunting a new, bolder style, one that James hadn't recognized, let alone appreciated. It wasn't long before James began to suspect that his perfect world was slowly crumbling. But nothing could have prepared him for the shock that was about to unfold. One evening, after a long day at the office, James returned home early to surprise Caroline with dinner. But when he walked into their bedroom, his heart sank. There she was, his wife, locked in a passionate embrace with another man. His mind raced, trying to comprehend what he was seeing. The man was tall, well-built, with striking dark features. He was someone James had never seen before. But Caroline's expression told him everything he needed to know. Betrayal. Caroline looked up, panic flooding her eyes when she saw James standing there, frozen at the door. The silence in the room was deafening, broken only by the soft rustling of their clothes as Caroline quickly pushed the man away and stood, shaking. "James! I can explain," Caroline stammered, but the words felt hollow. James stood there, his chest tight, every breath a struggle. "Explain? Explain what, Caroline?" "That you've been sleeping with someone else behind my back." The man, realizing the situation, scrambled to gather his things and hurriedly left the room. Caroline, her face pale, tried to reach for James, but he recoiled. "I never meant for this to happen, James," she whispered, her voice breaking. James shook his head in disbelief, pain shooting through his chest. "I gave you everything. I worked so hard for us, for you. And this is how you repay me." The betrayal was too much to bear. But what hurt even more was the realization that this was just the beginning of a nightmare James couldn't escape from. In the days that followed, Caroline's demeanor shifted. She became distant, her apologies empty. James tried to salvage what was left of their marriage, but it was like trying to fix a shattered vase. His trust had been broken, and no matter how hard he tried, it couldn't be repaired. But there was one thing James didn't know: the true extent of Caroline's deception. Months later, Caroline's betrayal took an even darker turn. James found himself waking up one morning to a nightmare that he would never escape. The police arrived at their doorstep, knocking on the door at the crack of dawn. James was still groggy from sleep when they informed him that his wife, Caroline, had been found dead. The news sent a shock wave through his body. How could this be? How could the woman he once loved, the woman who had betrayed him, now be gone? But what happened next left him paralyzed in fear. The police said that Caroline's death had been a murder, and all the evidence pointed directly to James. A 911 call had been placed from their home in the middle of the night, and James' voice was allegedly heard on the recording, threatening to kill Caroline. Neighbors reported hearing loud arguing earlier that evening, and when the police arrived at the scene, they found Caroline's body lying in a pool of blood, her neck violently snapped. James was arrested immediately, and all signs pointed to him. The shock of being accused of murder was enough to leave him in a daze. He couldn't understand how this could be happening, but the more he dug, the more it became clear that someone had set him up, and that someone, James soon discovered, was Caroline. In the days that followed, James learned that Caroline had orchestrated her own death, framing him for the crime. The affair, the betrayal, had been part of a much larger scheme. She had planned to make it look like James had snapped under pressure and killed her in a fit of rage. But why? What was her motive? The twisted answer came to light when James uncovered a series of secret bank accounts Caroline had opened. The money had been siphoned from their joint accounts for months, going to her lover and the people who had helped her stage the scene. It was a well-thought-out plan to ensure she could get away, leaving James to take the fall. The realization hit James like a ton of bricks. She had used him not just for love and money, but as the perfect scapegoat. She knew exactly how to manipulate him, how to break him, how to make him seem guilty. And now, her betrayal was going to cost him everything. But the truth had other plans. James, fueled by a mix of grief and determination, managed to gather the pieces of the puzzle. He found surveillance footage that showed Caroline meeting with her lover on the night of her supposed murder. He tracked down witnesses who had seen her leave the house the night before, alive and well. Piece by piece, the facade began to crumble. The evidence was clear. James was innocent. But as the truth emerged, Caroline's real plan came into full focus. She hadn't just wanted to leave him. She had wanted to destroy him. In a dramatic courtroom showdown, James was exonerated. The charges against him were dropped, and the police turned their focus to Caroline's accomplices. Justice, at least in part, had been served. But as James stood in the courtroom, a strange feeling of unease washed over him. He had won, yes, but there were still unanswered questions. And just as he was about to leave the courthouse, he received a letter that would shake him to his core. In the letter, Caroline's lover confessed to something far darker than James had ever imagined. And the truth, once again, would turn everything upside down. The letter arrived in a plain, cream-colored envelope. No return address, no name, just one word written in shaky cursive across the front. James. It was waiting on the dashboard of his car when he left the courthouse, a place no one should have been able to access. That alone chilled him. But what chilled him more was the content. She planned everything, but not the ending. She's not dead, James, and you were never meant to survive. James read those words again and again, his hands trembling. The signature at the bottom was scrawled and rushed, but the name jumped off the page like a gunshot in the dark. Nathan Cole, the same man he had walked in on, wrapped in his wife's arms. The same man who had vanished after the supposed murder. Until now, James took the letter to the police, but it was quickly dismissed. No fingerprints, no DNA, no way to verify its authenticity. They told him it was probably a sick prank. But James knew better. His instincts, the ones he'd ignored for too long, now screamed at him. Caroline was alive. The next few weeks were torment. James became obsessed with the idea that his wife had faked her death. He pored over every police photo, every report, every detail of the night she died. The body had been badly mutilated beyond recognition. DNA had matched, yes, but something didn't sit right with him. The crime scene was too clean, too calculated, and the autopsy? Rushed. Caroline's death certificate had been issued the very next day. As he dug deeper, he uncovered a chilling detail. The coroner who signed off on Caroline's death had mysteriously resigned 2 days later and vanished. James hired a private investigator, a former cop named Lila Monroe. She was blunt, skeptical, but intrigued. "If your wife is alive," she said during their first meeting, "we're not just dealing with fraud. This is a conspiracy, James. A big one." 3 weeks later, Lila called him at 2 a.m. "I found her." Caroline was living under a new name, Renee Whitmore, in a luxury villa on the southern coast of Portugal. Her hair was dyed black, her voice slightly altered, but it was her. The same icy blue eyes, the same faint scar above her eyebrow. James stared at the photos Lila had taken through a telephoto lens. Caroline was sipping wine by the pool, laughing with someone. And that someone was Nathan. They were alive, together, free. Rage coursed through James. But beneath the rage was something deeper. A haunting question he couldn't shake. Why had they let him live? That answer came soon enough. One night, after returning home from yet another restless drive, James walked into his living room to find it ransacked. Papers scattered, couch cushions torn apart, his safe cracked open. But oddly, nothing was taken. Not money, not valuables. Just one thing, the letter for Nathan. Someone had come looking for it. And that's when James realized Nathan hadn't meant to send the letter. He was warning him, but not by choice. Lila dug deeper. It turned out Nathan had a sister, Elena, a nurse at a private clinic in Lisbon. A few phone calls and surveillance screenshots later, the puzzle finally began to twist in a horrifying shape. Nathan wasn't Caroline's co-conspirator. He was her next victim. James could hardly breathe. All this time, he believed Caroline and Nathan had orchestrated the scheme together. But the truth was far more twisted. Caroline had seduced Nathan, lured him into an affair, then used him as a pawn in her escape. She had killed another woman, someone who resembled her, a missing backpacker from France, and used her body to fake her own death. She left enough evidence to point to James, then disappeared in a luxury with Nathan. But now she was planning to disappear again. And this time, she would pin everything on Nathan. James flew to Portugal with Lila. They kept a low profile, watching from a distance. It was like staring through a glass at a distorted reflection of the life he once had. Caroline played the doting lover. Nathan seemed happy, but there was something off in his eyes. Something trapped. The night they decided to act, a storm rolled in. Wind howled against the villa's glass walls. Waves crashed violently against the cliffs. And inside, hidden microphones placed by Lila the day before captured everything. Caroline spoke. "You don't have to worry, baby. Once we move the money, we'll disappear. No one will find us." "You said that last time," says Nathan. Caroline, laughing softly, said, "That's because I didn't finish the job last time. But this time, I will." Lila's eyes widened as they listened. "She's going to kill him tonight." They called the local authorities, but time was running out. James couldn't wait. He grabbed the microphone, flipped it on, and for the first time in a year, spoke directly into Caroline's world. "Caroline," the sound of glass shattering followed. "You thought you buried me. You thought I'd rot in prison. But I'm alive. I'm free. And I'm watching." Caroline screamed in the background. "You're not the hunter anymore. You're the hunted." The police arrived 15 minutes later to find Nathan tied to a chair in the villa's wine cellar, drugged and barely conscious. Caroline had vanished again, but she left something behind. A single red rose, placed on the kitchen table with a note. "Checkmate. For now." James stood at the edge of the cliff near her villa, wind whipping around him. Lila joined him, silent. "She's still out there," James said, jaw clenched. "Yeah," Lila said, "but now she knows you're not the man she framed. You're the man who's hunting her." As the screen fades to black, a camera zooms in on an airport security feed. A woman in sunglasses boards a private jet, passport in hand. Name, Evelyn Cross. Destination, unknown. But the eyes beneath the glasses? I see blue. Caroline Taylor faked her death, framed her husband James for murder, and vanished with her lover, Nathan. But the truth unraveled. She wasn't dead. She was alive and preparing to kill again. James turned the tables, saved Nathan, and exposed her plans. But Caroline slipped through their fingers once more, vanishing into the wind. Now, she's planning her final move. But the past has claws. It had been 6 months since Caroline disappeared for the second time. No trace, no sightings, no activity on her old accounts. She had once again vanished into smoke. Until now, James sat alone in a darkened hotel room in Vienna, Austria, the city where Caroline's scent had most recently surfaced. A woman matching her description, now going by Evelyn Cross, had attended a private gala for international investors just 3 nights ago. She'd used a new face, surgically altered. But James knew, you can't change her eyes. Lila Monroe, his relentless investigator and now the only person he truly trusted, stood beside him. They traced Caroline's movement through a stolen passport, shadow corporations, and encrypted bank transactions. Caroline was no longer running. She was building something. Lila said, "She's not just hiding, James. She's planning a legacy. Then let's end it before she writes her last chapter." James responded. That night, Lila infiltrated the hotel Caroline was rumored to be staying at. James stayed back, monitoring live camera feeds from the van. Everything was quiet. Too quiet. At 2:47 a.m., Lila's voice crackled through the earpiece. Room 908. It's her. I have eyes on. The feed cut. Silence. James froze. Static echoed in his ear. And then, a voice he hadn't heard in over a year. Miss me? It was Caroline. She was in the van. James turned slowly, and there she stood. Hair jet black, eyes glinting in the dark, a gun casually held in her gloved hand. Caroline spoke. You were always predictable, James. It's your most pitiful strength. James didn't flinch. His heart pounded in his ears, but he kept his voice calm. Why come back? You had everything. You won. James responded. Caroline stepped closer, tilting her head. Her smile was razor-sharp and said, because winning isn't enough. Not when the loser still breathes. She pressed the gun to his chest. You were supposed to die a year ago, but you kept clawing your way back like some sad, wounded animal. Caroline responded. Then finish it. James exclaimed. Caroline speaking softly. Oh, I planned to. But just as her finger tightened on the trigger, a cold click echoed behind her. Lila's voice, calm and lethal. Drop it. Now. Caroline slowly turned to see Lila standing in the doorway, gun drawn, her face a storm of fury. You never were good at minding your business, Miss Monroe. Caroline responded. Lila continued. And you were never good at finishing your mess. Caroline smirked, stepping back, gun still raised. It was a standoff, and James, the man who'd once been her puppet, now stood between them. James spoke in desperation. This ends tonight. In the silence that followed, Caroline made her choice. She smiled, and then she ran. Chaos erupted. Caroline bolted from the van, sprinting into the alleyway behind the hotel. Lila gave chase. James followed. They ran through the streets of Vienna, across bridges, under flickering streetlights, past the ghosts of their past. And then, at the edge of the Danube River, Caroline stopped. She turned, her back to the dark, cold water. Caroline spoke. You don't get to take me in. You think dying makes you the winner? James responded. Caroline continues quietly. No, but it means you don't win either. She raised the gun, pointed not at James or Lila, but at herself. Lila shouted, No. James lunged, but Caroline didn't pull the trigger. Instead, she laughed. And then from the shadows, Nathan emerged. Gun raised, hands trembling, eyes full of betrayal. Nathan spoke. You were going to kill me next, weren't you? Caroline froze. Nathan, it's not what you think, Caroline responded, trembling. Nathan continues. You used me. Again and again. Just like him. Just like everyone. Caroline spoke softly. No, baby. We were building something. You were building your escape. Alone. Nathan responded. And then a gunshot. One, clean, deafening. Caroline dropped to the ground. Blood pooled beneath her. Nathan stood frozen, the gun still warm in his hand. Silence. The kind of silence that comes after a storm has burned through everything. Later, the police arrived. Caroline's body was taken into custody. Fingerprints, DNA, the surgical records, all confirmed. It was her. The queen of deception was finally dead. 3 months later, James stood at the edge of the same river, wind tousling his hair. The weight of everything that had happened finally settling. Caroline had taken so much, his marriage, his freedom, his peace. But she hadn't taken his soul. Not in the end. Nathan was in a psychiatric facility, undergoing treatment. He spoke very little, but sometimes he whispered her name. Lila had gone back to her private practice, though James knew she kept her gun closer now. As for James, he started writing. A memoir. Framed. The woman I loved and the lie that tried to destroy me. It wasn't for revenge. It was for truth. A woman steps off a boat, her gait confident. Her face is different. So are her eyes. But the smile? That smile? It's unmistakable. She removes her sunglasses. It's her. Caroline. She lights a cigarette. A stranger walks past and nods. Stranger spoke. Evelyn. She smiles. Always. Caroline responded. Text appears. Caroline Taylor's body was never officially released to the public. DNA confirmation was labeled inconclusive in a sealed report. There are whispers in the criminal underworld. The Queen is still playing. Previously, Caroline Taylor, master manipulator, fugitive, and accused murderer, faked her death not once, but twice. She framed her husband James, used her lover Nathan, and outwitted the law at every turn. But in a dramatic twist, she was shot, supposedly killed by Nathan himself. Yet months later, a woman with her unmistakable smirk stepped off a boat in Montenegro, alive. And now, her game enters its final move. James was done running, done chasing shadows, done pretending the nightmare was over. Because somewhere deep in his bones, he knew Caroline wasn't finished. It started with a postcard, delivered to his doorstep in London. No envelope, no return address, just an image of a red queen chess piece. And on the back, in neat handwriting, "One last move, darling. Come find me, if you're brave enough." He could have ignored it, but James wasn't that man anymore. The man who had been betrayed, broken, and used. He died the day she framed him. What was left now was steel. Cold, determined. This wasn't about revenge anymore. This was about ending the game. With Lila's help, he traced the postmark to Qatar, Montenegro, a coastal town shrouded in old-world beauty, full of winding alleys and secrets that hid in plain sight. And there, on a balcony overlooking the harbor, she was waiting. Caroline, alive, radiant, dangerous. Caroline spoke. "You always did find me, James, like a moth to the flame. I'm not the one about to get burnt." James responded. There was no police, no backup, no plan, just two people, tangled in a history soaked with lies, blood, and desire. Caroline smiled and said, "I knew you wouldn't resist. You needed closure. Or maybe you needed me." James spoke. "I needed the truth. One last time." In response, Caroline said, "Then sit. Let me tell you a story." She poured wine. Of course she did. And James listened. Because he had to. Because no part of this ending could be written without her words. She never meant to fall for Nathan. He was a tool, a way out. But he clung too tightly. He became a liability. So she staged her second death. The body, in the villa, a cartel courier who had crossed her. Easy to drug, stage, and vanish. Nathan was supposed to be framed again. But James disrupted the plan. Again. And when Nathan pulled the trigger, the gun had blanks. She had planned even that. But when Nathan ran, panicked, and disappeared, she let the world believe she had died. One last time. James spoke. And now what? Another life? Another lie? Caroline responded softly. "No, this is the end. But only if you're willing to let it be." She slid a file across the table. Inside, video footage, documents, audio recordings. Every piece of her criminal empire. Names, dates, bank accounts. Everything needed to destroy what she'd built and bring justice to the people she hurt. She leaned back. "Caroline, you can take it. Go to Interpol. End me. Or pause. You walk away. Let the past stay buried. And you finally live." James stared at her. At the woman who once promised him forever, then left him in the dirt. She still had the power to pull every string. Even now, the final move was his, but it was her board. And that's when James stood up and said, "You're right, Caroline. It's time this ends." He turned, file in hand, and walked away. Caroline smiled. A little smug, a little sad. But when she turned to refill her glass, Lila was standing in the doorway, gun drawn, Interpol badge in hand, red light blinking on a hidden mic. Lila spoke and said, "Checkmate, bitch." 1 month later, Caroline Taylor was arrested and extradited to the United Kingdom. The evidence she handed over? Enough to dismantle 3 international syndicates, close over 50 cold cases, and implicate politicians, businessmen, and criminals around the world. She tried to make a deal, but justice didn't bargain this time. She was sentenced to life in prison. No parole, maximum security. And James? He didn't attend the trial. He didn't need to. James moved to the Scottish Highlands. No interviews, no books, no fame. He bought a cottage on a cliff and planted roses. The one flower Caroline never truly loved. Lila visited often. They didn't talk about the past, only the peace they finally earned. The prison cell, 3 years later. A guard delivers a letter to Caroline. She's older now, still sharp, still deadly. She opens it. A single chess piece falls out. The king. And a note. The game is over. You lost. And I lived. Jay. She stares at the piece. And finally, her smile fades.